You know, you're a classic example of the invert ratio between the size of the mouth and the size of the brain. Hello and welcome back to the Doctor Who Marathon. I'm your host McEdam, and today we're going to be talking about The Robots of Death, written by Chris Brancher and directed by Michael Bryant. This is a 4-part adventure, and before, it seemed like a lot of people considered this one of, if not the best, Fourth Doctor adventure, if not of the entire show. It was in many Doctor Who polls in which it came at least in the top 5 for many of the Doctor Who magazines. I used to see it a lot in a lot of people's top 10 favourite Doctor Who stories, but it seems like over the years its reputation has been tarnished. I've seen a few more recent YouTube channels, more examples being Davis and Mr. TARDIS Reviews, that think that the story isn't as good as people make it out to be and find it have a few issues with it. Now, I grew up with this story. This is one of the stories that was on VHS when I was a kid, and I've always had this appreciation for it as one of the greater Doctor Who stories. And when people ask me, I usually say that it is a fantastic Doctor Who story and to give it a watch. But even I can admit, now doing this marathon and rewatching it just for this video now, I can tell you that my opinions have also kind of weighed on it. It's don't get me wrong, it's still a fantastic story, but there are some elements that make it drag. And I think one of the things that makes it drag is the sets. At a few occasions they look really, really good. I especially like the outdoors with the sand and the small model in like the wasteland with the sandstorm and outside and stuff. And there's a few good shots inside. I especially like where the TARDIS is placed in the ship, and usually when you see it, you can see it like an outdoor view looking through a window, and that shot looks really cool. But when it's like in like the command center, or when it's in like the waiting room or in somebody's bedroom, I think it looks really dull, and I don't like the colour scheme that you use for it. It makes it very unpleasant to the eye. And I think as well as another part of the criticism is that the one-off characters in this story are not that interesting. I can't even name any of them off the top of my head, apart from the only really great new character to this is the villains, the robots, the Sandar robots. These things are so cool. They had not one, but 2 audio spin-offs. Yeah, they had Caldor City, which I believe was BBV. I could be wrong. I believe Chris Brancher actually let them use it. And Big Finish have done their own spin-off called The Robots, which I find really, what a generic title. Big Finish, if you're listening to this, change that title. It's absolutely terrible. So back to the story. So the Doctor lands on this planet, and they get caught up on this giant machine vehicle thing, which is basically it's like a mining tank thing, and there's a group of people running it, and when there's a sandstorm they can pick up all the minerals that they need and stuff, and get money that way, kind of like space gold. But there's been some murders, and as Doctor and Leela are the first ones new there, they are obviously suspected of being the killers. As well, throughout this story you get this these robots that are killing people. I mean, of course, the story is called Robots of Death. But But there's this whole thing with that robots cannot hurt humans. It's impossible. It's utterly unthinkable. Now, what you might realise from this story is that its influences, like I've said before, a lot of Philip Hinchcliffe stories, or just in the Fourth Doctor's era in general, have a lot of influence, mainly from horror films and horror novels. But here there's actually quite a few inspiration. Probably the most biggest in terms of this story is Agatha Christie novels, in which you have a murder constantly happening and in a small finite room. I guess you could call this story a base under siege. Yeah, okay, it's a base under siege story. The Doctor and the rest of our characters have got to work out who's the killer is. So it's basically space murder on the Orient Express. Another one is I, Robot, the short novel that the film by Will Smith is inspired from, as it even has the Clarke's 3 laws of robotics mentioned, in which humans cannot hurt humanity and they must serve humanity, which been programmed to every single form of robot life, which I find really cool. And another part is, a very small influence is Dune, a sci-fi novel which takes place on a sandy desert, which was also a bit of inspiration for Star Wars as well, I think. And so these influences come together to create this story. Now, what makes this story really work, in my opinion, is the world building. And you can see why this story has so many spin-off potential. It creates its own fictional world that can feel lived in. This world that seems dependent on robots. And these particular robots in mind, the Sandar robots, are brilliantly... just something about their design just really works. It really stands out. And I think, and I'm going to be honest with you, I think a lot of the praise of this story simply comes from this villain design. It's so menacing, but also so warming as well. You could believe that these people would live with these robots, but you can also believe it that when they're terrifying, people are scared of them with their big cartoonish eyes and lips. I'm trying to think of the word. They're so average, but in a good way. They touch the uncanny valley, which gets a non-named mention in this story in the terms of robophobia, which this story tackles. And a lot of the story also revolves around human dependence on technology, in that we've become so reliant on technology that if this technology is used against us, civilization as we know it will end, as the Doctor says at one point. So the murderer, so like I said, the story follows a murder mystery. Now, a big problem with this is that the new characters are just not that interesting. You got one character who is in it for the money, and he's like the leader, and he's like, everybody get back to work. I don't care if somebody's dead. We need to mine. You got these 2 female characters. Story-wise, they do exactly the same. They're basically like the soul of the crew. But apart from the fact that they wear silly, ridiculous costumes, which all these new characters wear silly, ridiculous costumes, but it works because everything kind of seems a little exaggerated in this world. So you kind of can picture it that this is just how people live in this time, whenever this is supposed to be set. And we also get just a few male characters that I can't remember the name of. One of them seems to be working with the Doctor, as he doesn't believe that they are murderers, and he wants to know what their theories are, what their plans are, and working out who is the real killer. And as well, Leela gets introduced to a black painted robot. I can't remember what his name, V84 if I remember correctly, and the black painted ones are the dumb robots, as they explain, and they can't talk. But however, this one can, and it tries to hide the fact through the rest of the crew, only really revealing his speech to Leela and how, and he asks about all these murders and stuff. So that's really, it's got a really engaging plot if it wasn't for the fact that the human characters were a bit dull. And a lot of criticism I hear about this story, which I don't personally, at least for the most part anyway, we'll get into that, is that the villain was too obvious. Now, I personally didn't see it coming. I actually thought the mystery was actually built up very well for parts 1 and part 2. When we get to part 3, however, you see the characters, the murderer, face on a screen when he tells a robot to go kill some people. And they try to hide it with some sci-fi effects, but you can clearly see who the actor is, and that kind of completely ruins the mystery. A lot of people say that they knew it from the very beginning. It was too obvious, but before episode 3, I honestly couldn't tell you who was the murderer. But who knows? Maybe that's just me. I honestly thought it might have been the guy with the robophobia, but no. Yeah, and so the story then develops, and spoiler warning, it's the guy who works fixing the robots, and it turns out this black painted robot was actually working for the guy with the robophobia, and they were on a secret mission to find a particular person, this mad scientist who has grown up with only robots. He'd never lived with humans, and he's never had a photo taken, and he basically believes that he's a robot and that he sympathizes with robots, so he tries to basically make a robot revolution in which these robots will become the dominant species and let humans be the slave race. Now, don't get me wrong, I think this is actually a really cool villain idea. The idea that some guy was raised by robots and becomes just crazy and thinks that they are sentient living things. It basically is like, what if somebody didn't see the uncanny valley? What if somebody did actually put robot life before human life? Which I find is really very heartwarming kind of concept for a villain. But what it doesn't work is that it does mean that there's a lot of inconvenience to make this plot work. For example, no photos of this guy was taken. A famous mad scientist with no photos, and he is known to the authorities. They've been looking for this guy. This guy has been mad basically his entire life, and there's not even a single photo to prove what he looks like. That, I think, is trying to twist the arm a bit to try and fit well with the story. Obviously, if this was set like in the past with Agatha Christie, it might be a little bit more believable because photography was a little less available back then, and you know, just the times like. But when you've gone to that from this story set in a distant future, and it makes it much more difficult for it to not go, right, we know who this person is, let's just look him up in the database and find out what he looks like. So they come up with the Chris Broncher and Robert Holmes came up with this idea, and yeah, I don't think that really works. I think it's important to note as well that despite the fans praising his story for many years, Tom Baker and Robert Holmes, who was the script editor at the time, personally hated this story. Tom Baker was known for being very difficult to work with Chris Broncher, and saying that some of the stuff that the Doctor did in the story wasn't very doctory. I don't know what he's talking about. Maybe they changed the script for Tom Baker's benefit, which would be a starting point of Tom Baker having more control, which he would get more in later seasons. And Robert Holmes says that he just didn't find the idea of killer robots that particularly interesting. He thought that a lot of the robot elements of this story was pretty dull, to which I disagree with. I think the robot elements of this story works fantastically well. I especially love the voices that they give the robots. And so we get a lot of, the tensions get higher and higher and higher, like they always do in these kind of stories. And how they defeat the villain, I love it. I absolutely love it. The mad scientist man, again, I can't remember his name, I do apologise. He speaks to the robots with this thing, and he gives them commands to try and kill people. And the Doctor hides Leela away in a vent with helium. And when he comes into the room, Leela opens the helium, and the guy's voice goes so squeaky that the robots don't recognise his voice. So when he says, kill all the humans, the robots also kill him. But when he says, don't kill me, they don't recognise his voice, so they kill him. Which is just a huge part of irony that he always believed himself to be a robot. But because he was human, he basically fell to his own petard. And yeah, there's not really much to say. It's a very simple plot line. So that's the Robots of Death. Overall, I think it is a great story. Don't get me wrong. It has a lot of great moments to love about it. Tom Baker and Louise Jameson are absolutely fantastic. Leela gets some pretty cool scenes in which she throws a knife at a robot and it bounces it off. That was a pretty cool scene. And the robots and just the world that it builds is just phenomenally realised. But however, a bit of the dull characters and some dull set design really leaves a mark on this story for me. And I don't think it's particularly one of the best Doctor Who stories. A great Doctor Who story, just not one of the best. So there you go, that's the Robots of Death. So join me next time for a double bill as we see River Song singing along before her death, and we get the Doctor and Leela playing Sherlock Holmes whilst they get introduced to two of Doctor Who's most iconic duo. So join me next time for the Talons of Greed and the Talons of Wing Chiang. See you next time on the Doctor Who Marathon. Ta-ra.